The next 1,000 years began with the first major war involving the Minbari as a whole world. The Konatai tribe, no longer content to dominate the territory around its mountain range and valley, began to entertain thoughts of conquest. These Minbari had benefited the most from the intervention of their Vorlon gods, and they possessed weapons and transport superior to anything the other tribes could hope to wield against them. Eventually, population pressures and pride drove the Konatai from their safe mountain homes to the battlefield, aiming to conquer the horizon and subjugate the surrounding tribes under their dominance. One of the driving forces behind this war of expansion was the Vorlon presence itself. The Minbari had begun to worship the Vorlons as deities, while other tribes also had their own patrons among this ancient starfaring race. This dynamic turned the conflict into one of religious indignation, with the Konatai Minbari seeking to bring truth and divine justice to the worshippers of false gods. The Vorlons, aware of the truth behind these matters, did not intervene to stop what became a long and bloody war of conquest and oppression. The Konatai Minbari surged forth from their valley like a crystal hand, crushing those they could not conquer. The war was protracted, largely due to the lack of swift-moving military units and the concerted resistance from all sides. While the Konatai had superior weapons and recent advancements in armor, they were drastically outnumbered by the combined forces of their enemies. The battles raged for more than 7 decades, characterized by cycles of expansion and contraction, with Konatai gaining territory and then losing it to determined tribes that pushed back where they could not defend their conquests. These battles accelerated the development of all sides at an unprecedented rate. Armor became common among every tribe, with Konatai's crystal forges producing newer, more effective suits while other tribes looted older pieces from the battlefield. Weapons rapidly advanced, transitioning from simple spears and thrown weapons to blades and bludgeons capable of defeating even the hardened protection of warriors in heavy armor. By the end of the conflict, the Minbari had entered a medieval period characterized by swords and plate armor, predominantly constructed from crystal. One reason for this reliance on crystal was its abundance. The mineral deposits of Minbar provided more than enough crystals for the Minbari to shape. This technology was facilitated by the use of rasps made from even more rigid but brittle deposits found underground. Compared to the speed and advantages of crystal crafting, metalworking became a secondary concern during the war. Metal weapons were used primarily in the later stages of the conflict when the need for weapons exceeded what crystal shaping could produce, especially for creating blunt implements capable of shattering heavy crystal plates. The territorial wars of the Konatai Empire left the landscape around their valley desolate and barren. The expansion efforts devastated every plant and depleted applicable deposits of crystal or metal ore. By the time the wars ended and the Konatai tribe retreated back into their grand city, their dreams of conquest were shattered, and only their valley and the surrounding mountains remained of their once grand empire. Everything else lay in ruins. The tribes that had been subjugated for 70 years by the Konatai were not satisfied with merely dismantling their war machines and reclaiming the land taken from them during generations of conflict. Instead, the tribes united and assembled a force many times larger than the remaining Konatai army. As the tribes retreated into the safety of their mountain-shrouded city-state, the Konatai army bore down upon them. For 2 years, they laid siege to the valley of the Konatai, destroying defense after defense at a tremendous cost to life. Although the Konatai were severely outnumbered, they had the advantages of superior weaponry and heavy fortifications. Ultimately, it was not the united tribal forces that brought about the end of the Konatai. While their massive army was strong enough to overcome the Konatai defenses, it suffered devastating losses in the final assault. The Vorlons, who had observed the conflict passively, had been pleased to see how their gifts had aided the Minbari, leading to their current age. However, they had never anticipated the threat of mutual annihilation that loomed. Realizing the situation was critical, the Vorlons decided to intervene. Before the tribal army could consolidate for their final attack, a massive fissure opened up along the valley floor of the Konatai and swallowed the entire city. Mountains crumbled, the land plummeted into the abyss, and when the tremors subsided, the Konatai were gone. Using their influence as gods to the united tribes, The Vorlons persuaded the tribal leaders to dissolve their alliance and return to their ancestral lands. Having learned from their mistake of allowing the Minbari to become too populous in one area, the Vorlons hoped that separating the tribes into smaller groups would restore the balance that existed before the rise of the Conatai. Over time, the name of the Conatai faded into legend among the other Minbari, a story about a lost city filled with unimaginable marvels, where false gods walked and death awaited anyone who sought it. The sense of cooperation that had united the tribes also diminished. Without a common enemy, the Minbari lacked the motivation to form a greater community, and the unity of the tribes became merely a memory. Despite the Vorlons' initial efforts to suppress them, some things did not fade. Many military innovations, such as swords and armor, became familiar enough that the tribes retained the ability to produce and employ them effectively. As a result, tribal wars began to erupt once again, more violent than any in their history. However, these conflicts were somewhat mitigated by the Vorlons' decision to isolate the tribes geographically. For several centuries, the Minbari existed in a state of cultural stasis, with little reason to advance their technology or social structures. The tribal order remained dominant, and the worship of the Vorlons, manifested as deities, continued. The Vorlons were absent for much of this time, drawn into the First Great War against another powerful race in the galaxy. This war occurred many light-years from Minbar, but preventing it from reaching their planet required considerable effort. In the Vorlons' silence, they were transformed into divine memories enshrined in the hearts and minds of the Minbari people, giving rise to complex religions that flourished during their absence. When the Vorlons returned after centuries of inconclusive battles with their rival race, the Shadows, they found Minbar changed yet still familiar. The Minbari people remained a tribal society, deeply engaged in worship of the Vorlons, and they continued to be a conflict-driven culture capable of fierce protection of their territory. In many ways, the Minbari had evolved into what the Vorlons needed most. Although the ancient race had struggled to defeat their rivals, they discovered a significant weakness in the Shadows. The Shadows were vulnerable to a specific wavelength of mental energy. While this did not incapacitate the Shadows, it had a detrimental effect on their ships and other tactical assets. While the Minbari were not yet capable of fighting their enemy when the war reignited, they would soon become ready for it. After the First Great War against the Shadows, the Vorlons changed their strategy from a slow and cautious intervention to actively seeking allies. The threat posed by the Shadows made them realize that to emerge victorious in future conflicts, they needed support. Ironically, the Shadows came to the same conclusion and sought to forge their own alliances. Rather than subtly influencing innovations among the Minbari, the Vorlons focused on forming the necessary partnerships directly. During this period, Minbari society underwent a profound transformation, evolving from a medieval state to an advanced industrial society. This transformation profoundly affected the Minbari, particularly due to the influence of the Vorlons. The Vorlons engaged with some of the more isolated tribes, those that had remained uninvolved during the fall of Conatai due to geographical separation or personal choice. They identified the most mentally capable and genetically viable members of these tribes and transported them to a world deep within Vorlon territory. This exodus, now faintly remembered in the collective memory of some northern Minbari clans, is celebrated as an ascension of light. The true catalyst for this event was the arrival of the Vorlon living transport, which took the honored members of these tribes to join the gods among the stars. The fate of the chosen Minbari in Vorlon space remains largely speculative. However, it is known that they underwent extensive genetic alterations through invasive and physically demanding experiments. It is possible that not all of the Minbari subjects survived these procedures. When the Vorlons eventually returned them to their original tribes, only half of those taken made it back to Minbar. The whereabouts of the remaining individuals, around 30 Minbari, remain a mystery. While this experiment was significant, the major driving forces during these 6 centuries were the rapid growth of industry in the more populous areas of Minbar and the rising level of technology among the world's various tribes. Notably, The Vorlons' influence played a substantial role in advancing martial developments during this period. Within a decade, it became common for Minbari warriors to wield refined metal or lathe-turned crystal swords. These hardened, razor-sharp weapons could easily cut through most armor of the time, leading to the creation of crystal mesh. This innovation involved interlinking finely shaped links over a suit of padded fibers designed to withstand blunt impacts. Consequently, this development also led to the invention of narrow-bladed weapons intended for thrusting attacks, reflecting the pattern of escalating arms observed among many other sentient species. What makes the Minbari's weapons development noteworthy is not only the rapid pace of innovation but also its sudden halt. During the transition to a post-medieval stage in weaponry and warfare, many tribes were still evolving, while those influenced by the Vorlons had already progressed beyond this phase. Instead of a single Konatai-like city, multiple tribal territories were established across Minbar, each with access to technology far superior to that of their rivals. By the time the lesser tribes developed the Holnath, a weapon comparable to the earth crossbow, these advanced groups were already testing the first cannet. The cannet was a projectile weapon that utilized mechanical gears to apply pressure to a crystal shell, directing the resulting shards towards a target. Its introduction transformed the nature of tribal warfare on Minbar. Even the most advanced forms of crystal mesh armor proved ineffective against the high-velocity shards fired from enemy weapons. Over the course of a century, the design of the cannet was refined in both size and functionality. Large bombards emerged that could eliminate numerous warriors at once, while smaller H-cannet could be carried and fired by a single warrior using one hand. In Minbar's industrial age, a tribe's survival increasingly depended on the number of cannet they could produce and maintain. While many tribes were still entering a post-medieval stage in terms of weaponry, those directly influenced by the Vorlons had already advanced far beyond that level. Looking back, although this period was brutal and violent, it was crucial in shaping the Minbari as they are known today. The invention of the cannet and its variations led to greater unity among the scattered tribes in their struggle for survival. Smaller groups became easy targets, regardless of their weaponry, which made larger assemblies and the expansion of existing settlements the most effective strategy to counter the advantages of rival tribes. The current Minbari architecture has its roots in this historical period. The cannet were devastating to infantry and lightly armored structures. However, their shards could not penetrate thick stone or substantial crystal. As a result, instead of building light structures that nomadic tribes could easily move, the Minbari decided to construct massive buildings using the abundant materials available on their planet. By the end of the Industrial Age, 7 major cities and numerous smaller ones dotted the landscape of Minbar, serving as testaments to the Minbari race's determination to survive. Within these thick walls, the united tribes enjoyed a measure of safety and peace. During these years, the Minbari's nomadic tendencies diminished, as the fate of any group lacking the necessary defenses became increasingly precarious. Use of massed cannet or fortified structures became painfully evident through the slaughter of thousands. By the year 6500 DV, no tribes remained outside the protection of city walls, except for a few isolated groups that the Vorlons directly sheltered. These tribes were regarded as holy by most Minbari, even by the most aggressive warrior settlements, and were afforded a significant degree of fearful respect and isolation. The reason for the defense of these tribes by the aliens became clear as generations of individuals were born and continued the genetic experimentation that had begun earlier. Within 3 birth cycles, the results of this process began to emerge. The first telepaths in the galaxy arose from these tribes, with the Minbari being augmented mentally and physiologically by Vorlon science. These psychically gifted Minbari were born with the ability to generate and receive mental frequencies related to both lower and higher order brain activity. As a result, they quickly ascended to positions of great power, supported by their Vorlon overseers as advisors and sources of divine inspiration. The grand design of the Vorlon's secret weapon against the shadows was taking shape. During this era for the Minbari, these telepaths were little more than rumors and legends. The rest of the race focused more on survival and advancing their technologies to achieve dominance over other cities and tribes. The first major geographical division of Minbar occurred through the alliance of warrior clans and the construction of a significant landmark that remains in ruins today. The Bright Barrier. Built as a complex arrangement of fortresses and thick defensive walls, the Bright Barrier spanned from one mountain chain on Minbar's major continental landmass to another more than 16,000 kilometers away. It was constructed along a geothermal series of subterranean fissures and was designed to capture intense heat within its walls while channeling solar radiance through massive blocks of cut crystal. The Bright Barrier was more than twice the length of Earth's Great Wall of China and 3 times the length of Centauri Prime's Dystopian, serving as a long line of garrison fortresses and remaining impassable due to its sheer size and blistering heat. The Bright Barrier effectively repelled any invasion attempts on the protected side for over 3 millennia. The construction of the Bright Barrier took 50 years and represented the pinnacle of engineering and industrial science available to the Minbari at that time. It symbolizes the height of the industrial age on Minbar. Alongside this impressive achievement, there were other significant milestones, including the advent of mass production, the introduction of primitive yet effective automation in mines and refineries, and the development of high-energy theories involving light and fundamental concepts of gravitation. While these complex innovations remained largely theoretical during the industrial era, their roots can be traced back to this period. Historically speaking, 600 years is a relatively short time to transition from swords and animal-drawn carts to handguns and gravitic equations. Their enigmatic extraterrestrial benefactors influenced the rapid development of the Minbari. In reality, the planet may have advanced even more quickly. However, the Vorlons were cautious about introducing too much advancement too rapidly due to the potential psychological backlash it could cause. For the Minbari to become effective weapons against the shadows, they needed not only advanced technology but also a deep understanding and acceptance of its use. With the Vorlons' help, the Minbari would soon reach for the stars, only to find a darkness waiting for them.